Hey there, everybody. Sage Popham here again, founder of the School of Evolutionary Herbalism, and welcome back to the Plant Path here. And hopefully you've been enjoying this kind of little series I've been sharing with you over the last number of weeks, just introducing some of the core concepts and approaches and kind of ways of seeing things of, the way we do things here at the School of Evolutionary Herbalism. And, in today's episode and the next one you're going to get next week are ones that are really dear to my heart. I mean, obviously it's all very dear to my heart, but I really love talking about this approach of really working with and understanding the whole person and the whole plant. Obviously, share a lot about the dynamics around what I see holistic herbalism being all about. And I think very important part of that is understanding the whole person, right? As I was sharing in the last episode on vitalism, I think it can be really easy sometimes, especially when we're just starting to work with people, or, especially for those of us raised in, more of a culture where allopathic medicine is the primary way medicine is practiced, right? You just grow up going to doctors and taking prescription over-the-counter medications. It's easy for a lot of those kind of approaches to carry over into our approach to herbal medicine and the way we think about people and sickness and disease and the way we administer plants to them. It can be easy to fall into that allopathic herbalism trap. And I think a big part of that trap is losing sight of the whole person. And, something that a lot of herbalists say, but the one herbalist I've heard say over and over and over again, a mentor of mine, David Winston, he says, we don't give herbs to diseases. We don't give herbs to symptoms. We give herbs to people, right? We don't treat symptoms and disease. We treat people. And I love that, just the simplicity of that statement, but also the profundity of that statement, because the way I see it is he's talking about, it's a mindset. It's a way of seeing and a way of thinking about things. It's the way you approach a person. It's the way you consider your remedies. It's a way you put your formulas together. It's like it influences every part of the way you practice herbal medicine. And ultimately it's a holistic approach, right? Because we want to look at the whole person. And so that's what I wanted to talk about in a little bit more detail today, to hopefully give you some more insight and inspiration on your plant path. So what does the whole person mean? Like, what does that mean? Well, one way I like to think about it is through the lens of the alchemical tradition, which I've shared a little bit about over the last number of weeks, talking about in alchemy, everything in nature is said to be composed of three fundamental principles, what are referred to as sulfur, mercury, and salt. And that generally within people is correlated to, not just within people, but within everything, is correlated to, sulfur being the soul, mercury being the spirit, and salt being the body. And while these three principles are kind of, seen as separate in a way, like they're studied separately and there's ways that they can't be separated, within us, they are all a conglomeration, right? They all come together. They are all intricately interwoven with one another and ultimately aren't separate. And I think this is a really important again, mindset thing, because it's really easy, and you see it all the time of like, because of our language mechanics, you see things like, the body and the mind and the emotions and the spirit, or the body, mind, and spirit, and it's like body, comma, space, mind, comma, space, and space, spirit, it's like they're separate. And, but it's like, it almost should be one word, right? It should be like body, mind, spirit, like body, spirit, soul, like one word, to show that they're not separate. And it ends up leading to kind of an approach, again, that isolates these parts of the self. And it thinks that, oh, the body's over here and it's got its anatomy and its physiology and all this, that, and the other. And, your psychological dynamics and emotional dynamics are over here, kind of in its own separate little pod, so to speak. And, all the soul and the spiritual stuff's like over here. But it's really not the case, right? That we are a whole person. We are a singular being. And yes, we have these layers of the self, but they're not actually separate. They're connected. And this is very, very important because from my perspective as a holistic herbalist, we need to address each layer of the self in our approach to working with people. To me, a holistic practice of herbalism should talk about someone's psychological, emotional health, should talk about someone's soul. Are they happy? Do they have purpose? Do they have meaning in their life? Do they have, something greater than themselves that they're striving towards, that they're working towards? Do they have goals and dreams and aspirations? Like, to me, those are all things of the soul. And if we're missing any of those, like, you can be in peak physiological health. You can be like eating the best food in the world, and you could be exercising, and you can be like completely like the picture perfect of physical health. But if you're depressed all the time, are you really healthy? If you have anxiety all the time, are you healthy? If you are completely isolated and don't have, good social health, are you healthy? If you don't have, a goal, a dream, an aspiration, a purpose, if you don't have a sense of purpose with your life, can we really say you're healthy? Right? We always have work to do on ourselves. And to me, I think, herbalism, for obvious reasons, is very commonly physiologically focused, right? We're focused on healing the body. And oftentimes that trickles into, maybe psychological, emotional health. If someone's depressed all the time or anxious all the time, there's things that we can do to support that, usually on a physical level, the physical affecting the psychological, emotional. So there you go. Again, they're not separate. But I think the consultation doesn't have to end when the physical symptom subsides. That as an herbalist, we can continue to work with people on these other layers of the self, and that from my perspective and from the alchemical tradition, the plants, the medicines of the earth, operate on that level too. Because they have sulfur, mercury, and salt, soul, spirit, and body in them as well. And because of that, they have the ability to heal and operate upon those same parts of ourselves. So I want to break down a little bit, just really quickly, kind of like my perspective of what those layers represent, and how in our work with people, I think these are all things that we have to kind of keep on our mental dashboard, so to speak, in our awareness as we work with people. So let's start with kind of the most obvious one, which is the salt level of influence, talking about the physical body, right? That's what salt represents in alchemy. It is our physical being. They say that salt is composed of like the earth and the water elements, these fixed elements. And this is what gives us a vehicle, right? They say salt is the vehicle through which the soul and the spirit, or the sulfur and mercury, are able to operate through and actually be a part of this physical kind of world. And so within us, that salt level of influence is really looking at, I see it in kind of, again, like these layers. And this is like in alchemy, they talk a lot in layers, they talk about, kind of like the layers of the solar system and how that reflects on the layers of our being. And a lot of different traditions talk about that. In the East too, they talk about the different layers of like your aura and the chakras and the layers of the elements and things like that. But I kind of think of it on a physical level too. So kind of on the most general layer, you have your constitution, your overall kind of stature, the shape of your body, the tone of your skin, the sound of your voice, the color of your hair, the luster of your eyes, the length of your limbs, you kind of your prominent tissue. Are you more of like a adipose tissue, muscular tissue, tendon, ligament, right? Like what's the most prominent tissue that you see? So the constitution, you're kind of looking at the big overall general tendencies and characteristics of the body, which actually give you a lot of insight into the inner workings of the body. We'll talk about this more next week. There's a principle in the West called the doctrine of signatures. It's a universal global concept. We just call it doctrine of signatures. And that's very much rooted in the esoteric traditions in the West. But they say, that the inner nature of something is reflected in its outward signs and its outward signature. So you can decipher the inner qualities and virtues of something just by having a way of seeing things, like I was talking about last week, having a way of seeing the patterns, the signs, the signatures kind of etched into the external form. So you can understand the function of something by understanding the nature of its form. And this is a part of constitutional systems. There's a whole bunch of them all in different herbal systems. But to me, that general layer of the salt is really looking at the constitution. From there, we go inside the body and we see kind of that first functional organization in the body is systems, right? We have these systems in the body, each one having a very specialized role and function to maintain the homeodynamics of the body, right? So we have like the respiratory system and kind of the whole government of the air element, our lungs, our bronchioles, our sinuses and nose, right? The whole respiratory system. And things like your cardiovascular system, the heart, and your arteries and arterioles and capillaries and veins and venules and that whole circulatory system. Digestive system, right? Your mouth all the way down to the stomach and the small and large intestine. Right, so we have these systems, and each system, as I said, provides a very important functional role to maintain the health of the body. They all have a specialized function. From there, we go down another layer to see organs, right? Systems are composed of organs, right? Just like I was saying, we have the whole digestive system, but then you have the stomach as an individual organ, the small intestine as an individual organ, and the large intestine as an individual organ, right? So we can kind of break systems down into the organs as another way of assessment. Because for me, when we're working with a person, sometimes someone will have like a full system imbalance, right? Like something is impacting their entire digestive system, right? And so we want to understand our remedies, like what remedies are going to impact that on a system-wide level, where other times people might have more of a localized imbalance within a very particular organ. So maybe their small and large intestine are okay, but they've got something going on in the stomach, right? Maybe they have an ulcer in their stomach, or they've got reflux or hypo or hyper or hypochlorhydria, right? It's a very kind of local organ imbalance. So this is one way that when I'm working with the person, I'm always thinking, okay, like what layer of the person is the imbalance occurring on? Where's the root of it? Is it a constitutional imbalance? Is it a system imbalance? Is it an organ imbalance? And then from there, we can go into the tissue level, right? Where the constitution is comprised of the interconnectivity of our systems, and the systems are comprised of the organs, and the organs are comprised of tissue. And so we can look at different tissue types, and that can lend a lot of insight into where an imbalance might be present. For example, in a single organ, we might have like, take your respiratory tract, for example, like your bronchioles. Well, you got mucosa there, right? That's secreting mucus with immune-rich mucus to protect our respiratory system from pathogens. But it's also the bronchioles, they're also lined with smooth muscle. So if someone's got something going on in the respiratory tract, you can think even simply like, oh, okay, maybe they've got a lot of dryness in their respiratory tract. Well, that's a mucosal membrane thing, right? So we want to use an herb with a specific affinity for the mucosa. Conversely, if they have, say, asthma, and it's like really tense and tight, and they feel this tension in the chest, their airways kind of reduced a little bit, they can't get enough air in because everything's constricting. Well, that constriction is like spasm in the smooth muscle. So in that case, you wouldn't necessarily want to give something for the mucosal membrane because the imbalance is in the muscle tissue, the smooth muscle. You want to give an antispasmodic, like something like lobelia or skunk cabbage, right? To dilate and open up those tissues. So I'm always thinking in terms of tissue types as well, because sometimes you might have different herbs with an affinity for a certain organ, but they might work on a different tissue in that organ, right? So again, this is another way where we can get very specific in the way we're kind of looking at people. And then the last layer I like to think of on the salt level here is the energetics, which I was talking about in the previous episode, talking about vitalism and learning from nature. Is the organ system or tissue hot or cold? Is it damp or is it dry? Is it tense or is it relaxed? And that gives you a lot of insight into the specific nuances and nature of their disease or their symptom or their pattern, that lends a lot of insight into that. So that's the way I think of that salt level. And there's different ways and approaches of understanding this. Like, there's kind of more of the Western anatomical perspective, like I was talking about. But of course, systems like traditional Chinese medicine, they kind of have their own approach to, our anatomy and physiology, which is physical, but also kind of not physical, right? Like when in TCM, when they say liver, they're not talking about your liver here that makes bile and, metabolizes things. They're talking about kind of something totally different. When they're talking about kidneys, yeah, it includes our physical kidneys, but the concept is much greater than that. It's physical and it's, kind of subtle and esoteric at the same time. And so there's different models and approaches for understanding this kind of salt level, that physical part of the person. But the ultimate goal is to really have a specific and fine-tuned understanding of what is going on that physical level. Mercury is the layer of the self that I like to think of as like your mental and emotional dynamics. In alchemy, Mercury is composed of air and water. And air tends to represent the mind and thinking, and water tends to represent our emotional feelings. And so the Mercury layer of the self is, again, looking at our psychological and emotional health. Do we think positively is really the kind of simplest way I tend to think of it. Like when we think about other people, when we think about ourselves, when we think about the things that we need to do, is there optimism? Is there positivity? Is there upliftment? Is there happiness and joy there? And that kind of ties into the emotional side. Are we constantly angry and frustrated all the time? Are we constantly sad all the time? Or do we generally have like a friendly, upbeat, positive demeanor? These are things that are directly tied into our health that I think are very important to consider when we're working with people. And so even if someone doesn't have physical problems anymore, I'll oftentimes take a whole session to just talk about emotional health, talk about psychological health. Like, what are their patterns? What are the patterns that they have present there? And this directly correlates to the sulfur level, right? Which is that soul level. And, here I'm kind of thinking about the deepest part of the self. The soul They say in alchemy they say the spirit is like universal, whereas the soul is individual. It's unique. It's our own unique consciousness. It's the thing that makes you you. Right? Like everyone has thoughts and everyone has feelings, but there's only one you, and there's that unique thing that makes you yourself. That's sulfur. That's the soul. And when we're thinking about the healing side of it, to me, I'm looking at, considering things like traumas that people have gone through, things that really kind of hit you at the core of being, right? Like something really traumatic happens, something that really has a profound impact on like your consciousness, on your perceptions, on your beliefs. Here I also think of like maybe things that are passed down ancestrally, like the patterns that we carry from, our mother, our father. And we might also even consider genetics as being a component here, which, some say is outside of our control. Others say we do have a degree of influence on gene expression. There's a lot that could be gone into there on that, from talking about the epigenetic structure to the simple importance of minerals and nutrients, but especially minerals, in optimal, gene transcription and genetic functioning. But the sulfur part is, we're talking about someone's soul, and we're talking about someone's, purpose in life. Like what are the things that hold them back from achieving the purpose in life? Like, let's look at that. Let's talk about that. Let's work on healing that. And in the alchemical perspective, plants have the ability to help us on this level too, So we take all of that into consideration, right? In the evolutionary herbalism model, we think about the soul, the spirit, and the body. We think about not only that, but really looking at like, what are the thematic elements in someone's life? Like, what are the archetypal patterns that influence the soul, the spirit, and the body? Because, a problem can exist on any of those levels and can influence any of those levels. Like the root can be in the sulfur, but it can affect the mercury and the salt. The root can be in the salt and affect the mercury and the sulfur. And it's our job to kind of figure out and determine and decipher that and administer remedies to target that part of the person. And the way this is done traditionally in alchemy is by looking at the energetic architecture of that person, because each constitution, each organ, each system, each tissue, each energetic pattern, each psychological and emotional pattern, each kind of thing that we face in the soul is correlated or corresponded to these archetypal influences of the 7 planets, the 5 elements, and the 3 philosophical principles. And so we're kind of looking at what is the energetic architecture, so to speak, of that person. Like, what are the main rulers, so to speak, that are affecting their life in an adverse way. So if someone's like angry and frustrated all of the time and they're lashing out in anger, and maybe they've got an autoimmune condition, and maybe adrenals are really fatigued and they've got a lot of heat and inflammation in their body, well, we would look at that and say, oh, that's all Mars. Like, Mars is affecting that person, and that's going to lead us towards particular therapeutic protocols and particular forms of spagyric remedies that will target that archetypal influence. And so this is a part of the evolutionary herbalism model and the alchemical approach to herbalism, where we're not just saying, oh, these herbs are good for autoimmune condition, or oh, these herbs are good for, even this flower essence is good for anger. We're really looking at it on this archetypal level. It's kind of hard to explain sometimes without like going really deep into it. But that really is the very different approach in alchemical herbalism, is that you're addressing the archetype behind the disease, the archetype affecting the sulfur, mercury, and salt of the person. And then the whole art of spagyric pharmacy is you craft your remedies to embody those archetypal influences, which we might talk about next week when we talk about the whole plant. So we're holistically working with and evaluating people in this way. We do a consultation is beyond just an interview, right? There's the interview, there's talking with people, asking them great questions, but this also means you're feeling their pulse. You're looking at their tongue. You're looking at the tone of their skin. You're looking at the lines on their face. You're listening to them, not just with your ears, but with your heart. You're going into their whole past medical history. You're going into all the things that they put into their body, from their food and their fluids and their supplements and their herbs and their drugs, and like everything about that person. Like, your goal in working with people is you want to have an understanding of their life, right? You want to have an understanding of the nature of their life. And as kind of a detective, you're deciphering what are the contributing factors to their challenges that they're facing in their life and in their health, and what can you do to help to correct that, both with medicinal plants, but also just from a lifestyle perspective. And I think that's a really important part of working with people holistically, is that oftentimes we have health problems because of the way we live our lives every day, right? Like, let's face it, we all have certain patterns that are unhealthy, right? We all have them. I have them. It's just part of being human. And sometimes they become habitual and they're hard patterns to break, or we're just not even aware of it. We just don't think of it. And that's how we can continue to serve people, to help them make healthier decisions, to help them live a life of health so that they can have longevity. They can live a long time, but not just longevity for the sake of longevity, but they can live a long, healthy, happy, uplifted, inspired, purposeful life. And I think that is really what our definition of health should be. It's not just a lack of disease or symptoms. It's not just a physical thing. It's a state of being that is of the soul, of the spirit, of the body. And in that way, I believe, as the practice of evolutionary herbalism, the work with people goes beyond just the resolution of physical symptoms, right? It goes into rejuvenative medicine, preventative medicine, transformational medicine. That's the way of working with people in the evolutionary herbalism model, and in many traditions of herbal medicine as well, that we can not just alleviate symptoms, but rejuvenate the body, bring greater levels of vitality to the system, that we can look at and see where are predispositions for disease coming in the future. Where are there weak spots? What organs tend to be weak or deficient, or maybe not as robust and vital? There's ways in the alchemical tradition and in medical astrology to be able to determine, and in constitutional systems to be able to determine those types of things. Now we can work with herbs to strengthen and replenish and rejuvenate, and ultimately prevent the onset of disease from happening in the future. And on that other level, we have transformational medicine, which is, working with that sulfur level, working at resolving traumas from the past, at working through those deep core issues that people struggle with, to transform them into something positive, to turn their weakness into their strength, to turn their poison into their medicine, right? This is kind of what alchemy is about, is transformation, right? Lead into gold, and making those things that drag us down and turning them into our strength and our gift and our actual way of being in greater service to the world at large. So these are kind of some of the concepts that I think of when I'm considering what I mean when I say the whole person, or the holistic person. Sometimes I feel like I like to go into some of these concepts, because sometimes I'll just say like, work with the whole person. It's like, well, what does that really mean? Like, you might be thinking that. What does Seja mean when he says that? Well, this is a little introduction to what I mean when I say that. Of course, I could go on and on and on about one of these little bullet points for hours, but this is just kind of a high-level overview of the whole person. So hopefully that was insightful for you, interesting for you. If you did enjoy that, do me a favor and just hit that likes button, subscribe button, post a comment somewhere if you're watching this anywhere but the Evolutionary Herbalism blog. Head on over there to evolutionaryherbalism.com where all our stuff is at. And I just want to say thank you for being here with me and watching this video to the end. It actually really helps to support the channel and so that we can continue to provide some free content to the herbal community. So thank you so much once again. I really appreciate it. And until the next one, take care and be well.